improvise, adapt, and overcome.
Okay. Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of the Carry On Podcast. This is your SITREP for the week of, well, it's Easter. I think everybody knows what Easter is. Our broadcast week is intending to post the close of the week. We try to wrap it up towards the close of the week, but sometimes because of our commander-in-chief, we let it run over the weekend. A lot of interesting stuff happens over the weekend, and this week was no exception. So we are coming to you later than normal, and sometimes that's just going to happen. I appreciate everybody's patience, and I hope that you had a wonderful Easter. I personally love Easter mostly for the imagination it takes to mesh an egg-laying chicken and a rabbit into some sort of iconography. Honestly, I think South Park did it really well. Check out season 11, episode 5, Hair Club for Men, fantastic. Or if you wanted to be more recent, Rick and Morty did a wonderful Easter on their last season. So either way, it's good stuff. Check it out. I wanted to recognize a couple of our latest Patreon subscribers, give them some love. So letting everyone know that Charlotte, Papa Juliet Hotel, Brady, Alyssa, and Ava are our latest supporters. Very much appreciate everybody. And it is things and places and people like you that make the show possible. So I really appreciate it. Beverage tonight, we're just doing really simple. Don't let the glass fool you. It's an Imperial IPA. It is not from Stone. It is from, I can't remember. And I promise I haven't not had but one. And this is the one. It's not even done yet. It'll come to me. It'll come to me later. It's decent beer. It's not my preferred, but it's decent. So we'll leave it at that. A lot of items have taken place. A lot of items. We're going to talk about quite a few of them. We're going to leave some others until next week because I want to focus on a few that are important to me. Hopefully they're important to you. And if I left something off, by all means, let me know. And speaking of which, I really appreciated everybody's comments on the AMA. I am genuinely interested in everyone's questions. You may write into the show at contact@bradcolbert.us. If you have questions that you would like me to answer, we are gathering them up for our next AMA. And it's unfiltered. It's honest. It's raw. I will not pull any punches. And I have no doubt that at least some of you were offended on my last AMA, which is how I know that it is working, because you can't please all the people all the time. All right, looking at the issues that we have today. So let's dive right in with Iran's leverage war, Baghdad, the downed Strike Eagle, and the Hormuz ultimatum. Tonight's picture is bigger than one kidnapping. It's bigger than one downed jet. It's bigger than one presidential threat. What we are looking at is the shape of the war. An American journalist disappears in Baghdad. A U.S. Strike Eagle gets shot down over Iran. The White House threatens Iran infrastructure if the Strait of Hormuz does not reopen. I have no doubt that everyone heard that post on Truth Social that the president made. Yeah, a lot of people are talking about it. So you have three stories. It's the same logic, same pressure campaign, same signal. And the signal is this. The United States still has the bigger hammer. Iran and its aligned networks still control enough friction, enough ambiguity, and enough pain to keep this war from looking clean. That is the real picture. Let's start in Baghdad. American freelance journalist, if you are not following this story, Shelley Kittleson was abducted in central Baghdad on March 31st. Iraqi security forces reportedly pursued the kidnappers. They have arrested one suspect and recovered a vehicle. But as of this brief, there is still no credible public proof of life. There's no publicly verified recovery and no official closure. And that matters. Because when a case stays this murky, this long, in this kind of environment, you stop treating it like random street crime. No public claim of responsibility. There's no clear ransom architecture. There's no clean criminal messaging. There's absolutely no fast transactional pattern. Now, that does not prove militia command responsibility by itself, but it narrows the picture. And the picture gets even darker when you look at the follow-on pressure campaign. If I periodically pause, it's because I'm sipping my tasty beverage. So, the Committee to Protect Journalists, Reporters Without Borders, and the Foley Foundation have now urged Secretary of State Marco Rubio to formally designate Kittleson as a hostage and mobilize all available resources and diplomatic channels for her release. That is not routine consular language. That is escalation language. That means the case is pushing out of the lane of ordinary law enforcement, and it's into the lane of formal hostage response. And that is the point, it seems to me, that most people seem to miss, is that this story is not just an American journalist was taken. The story is what that says about Baghdad. If an American can be abducted in the Iraqi capital after known warnings and the state still cannot publicly produce her or transparently identify the network behind it, then Iraqi sovereignty remains conditional, at least where militia power is involved. And that is the disease. The kidnapping is completely the symptom. That's the harder truth here. People keep talking about Iraq or Iraq like it is a fully sovereign country because it has ministries, uniforms, motorcades, press conferences, and checkpoints. Fine. That's the outer shell. But power, real power, is measured at the point of coercion. Who can seize a person? Who can hold them? Who can deny the state? Who can force silence? That is where sovereignty gets tested, and Baghdad keeps failing that test. Okay, now let's move east. Probably not a surprise to anyone, but let's talk a little bit about the U.S. F-15E Strike Eagle was shot down over southern Iran on the 3rd of April during the ongoing U.S. air campaign. 2 crew members ejected. One recovered very quickly. The second remained isolated inside hostile territory and was later rescued alive on April 5th in what reporting describes as a large, violent, high-risk combat search and rescue operation involving Special Operations Forces, specifically SEAL Team 6, dozens of aircraft, Pave Hawks, AC-130s, A-10s, and intelligence support in the form of the CIA. Now, that rescue was a tactical success, but do not get lazy and mistake tactical success for strategic comfort. The rescue, not the whole story. The shootdown, that's the story, because the shootdown tells you that Iran still retains enough air defenses, enough ground fire, enough residual battle space awareness, or, frankly, enough sheer capacity to create real friction for U.S. aircraft operating over Iranian territory. That means U.S. air operations are not frictionless. That means that our suppression is not complete. It means that somebody on the other side can still reach up and impose cost. And that matters a hell of a lot more than the victory lap. Because once that second crew was alone on Iranian soil, the center of gravity changed instantly. All of it. At that moment, this stopped being just an aviation incident. It became a massive capture avoidance crisis. And Washington, specifically President Trump, clearly knew it, because if Iran had captured a living American aviator, this war would have snapped sideways into hostage politics, coercive bargaining, propaganda warfare, domestic outrage, definitely, and without question, a retaliatory spiral. That was the nightmare. That was the red line. That was the thing the rescue had to prevent. And fortunately, it did. But again, that success came at a price. When you need a major rescue package, escort aircraft, ISR, special operations forces, deception support, again, thank you, CIA, and heavy air cover just to recover one isolated airman, that tells you something important. Personnel recovery is no longer a side mission. It is part of the main campaign tax. Every downed aircraft now carries the risk of a second battle. Every isolated survivor becomes a magnet for isolation. I would say every rescue package becomes its own operation with its own exposure, its own attrition risk, and its own propaganda consequences. That is not air dominance. That is contested airspace. That is contested penetration. And this is where a lot of the cheerleaders in the Iran campaign are lying to themselves. If they say the rescue proves total U.S. superiority, they/you are ignoring the fact that the aircraft went down in the first place. If they say the shootdown proves Iran is winning, well, you're also lying, because the United States still reached into hostile ground, still brought its people home, still recovered everyone. So honestly, the harsher read, the honest read, it's narrower. The rescue redeemed the moment, but the shootdown defined it. Now, step back again. Let's look south towards the Strait of Hormuz. This is where the rhetoric gets loud enough to reveal the strain underneath all of it. Because the U.S. administration has shifted from deterrence into compellence. We have been advertising that we will open up the Strait of Hormuz. It hasn't happened yet. That distinction, it matters. Deterrence says, do not do the thing. Compellence says, undo the thing you already did or we escalate. And the second one is harder. It's bloodier. It's more dangerous. And usually less stable. President Trump's latest messaging made that brutally clear. If you read his tweet, and I can't imagine anyone that didn't at this point, the line, as publicly reported, was not subtle. It was not restrained. It was not domestic camouflage. It was not diplomatic camouflage either. It was a direct threat against Iranian infrastructure if the strait is not reopened by Tuesday night at midnight, our time. I think it's our time. By our time, I mean Washington, D.C. time. If it's not reopened by Tuesday, he threatened that bridges and power plants explicitly named in the threat language. And that tells you something immediately. Washington believes current military pressure has not been enough to force Tehran to relinquish its leverage. And Tehran's leverage is, it's not hard to understand. Iran doesn't need to own the sea in some grand cinematic way. It does need a clean naval victory. It does not need to sink the Fifth Fleet. It just needs to make the strait dangerous enough that shipping slows, causes panic, energy markets spike, and allied capitals start feeling the pressure. And I think all of the above have been met. I think all of them have been met. This is how a weaker actor weaponizes geography, and they have that to their advantage. You take this narrow checkpoint, like the Strait of Hormuz, you turn it into uncertainty, you turn that uncertainty into price shock, then turn that price shock into political pressure. That is the Iranian play today. And if U.S. intelligence reporting is right, and I think it is, that Iran is unlikely to ease that chokehold anytime soon, then the administration's rhetoric makes even more sense. Not because it sounds strong, but because it sounds strained. If reopening Hormuz were easy, then you would not get this kind of public deadline. You would not get this kind of profanity. You would not get infrastructure named so specifically. No, that kind of messaging tells you the White House is trying to project dominance while staring directly at a real leverage problem. And once you start naming bridges and power plants, the war starts telling you what it wants to become. Infrastructure war. Economic punishment. Dual use targeting and reciprocal coercion. That's the slope right there. And once states start walking down that slope, it gets harder to separate battlefield targets from strategic punishment targets. And like it or not, that is where legal risk rises. That is where diplomatic room narrows. And that is where international support starts to really wobble. There have been a tremendous number of foreign leaders reacting to that Truth Social post. Because threatening a missile battery is one thing. Threatening bridges and power plants is something entirely different. And when you put all three of these stories together, don't look at them in isolation. That's amateur. Look at the pattern. In Baghdad, their pressure point is deniable militia coercion. In Iranian airspace, the pressure point is attrition and capture risk. In Hormuz, the pressure point is maritime disruption and energy leverage. Different methods. But the same architecture. Iran and its aligned networks are not trying to beat the United States symmetrically. They can't. They don't have a chance. They're simply trying to keep the Americans from making the war neat. And that is the real objective. Not battlefield perfection. Not cinematic victory. It is not some fantasy of matching the United States plane for plane or ship for ship. It's just enough to impose friction. Just enough deniability to complicate attribution. Just enough pain to make every American move expensive. And we've seen it already. And right now, that's exactly what they are doing. Now, does not mean that the United States is losing. But it does mean the United States is winning exchanges without imposing closure. And that's a different thing. I think that America can strike, and America can rescue, and America can threaten escalation. America can still hit harder than anybody else in the room. But we have not removed the adversary's ability to seize initiative in the gray zones between those events. And that is the trap. That is the trap that we have fallen into today. Because wars are not only lost by losing battles, they are also drained by never being able to close the loop. So a journalist gets taken. You cannot close the loop. A fighter goes down. You rescue the crew. but only after exposing a giant recovery package. The Strait of Hormuz gets squeezed. You threaten escalation because the squeeze is still working. That is not defeat, but it is not dominance either. It is a grinding contest over leverage. And if you want, I would say if you want the single cleanest line from this whole episode, it is probably America has the bigger hammer. Iran still controls the pain dial, and that's the war. So what comes next? I would say on the Kittleson case, expect more pressure for formal hostage designation, more quiet U.S. pressure on Baghdad, potentially more public reporting that narrows the suspicion towards militia-linked actors. Iranian, by the way, they're, very, very confident that it is an Iranian-backed militia group that has her. But until there is proof of life, until there is recovery or public attribution with real state backing, this whole case remains strategically toxic. Now, second, on the military front, I would expect the U.S. to intensify efforts against Iranian radar, missile batteries, mobile air defense systems, and frankly, any threat networks linked to that shootdown and rescue friction. No serious command absorbs a fighter loss over hostile territory and just shrugs. Third, on the Hormuz, Tuesday night, midnight, watch the deadline because public ultimatums create their own trap. The more visible the threat, the higher the credibility cost of backing down. And he has made one hell of a credibility threat. The more specific the threat, the more likely somebody feels compelled to act on it. And that act, the next move, that makes it dangerous. If Iran holds firm, the pressure for broader infrastructure targeting then rises. If Iran permits limited traffic under its own conditions, it may try to preserve leverage while muddying the case for a broader U.S. response. If our allies hesitate to participate visibly in enforcement or escalation, well, then Washington faces a choice between a unilateral burden and a reputational retreat. None of those are clean options. And that is the reality. I'll close it like this. The kidnapping in Baghdad, the downed F-15E Strike Eagle, and the Hormuz ultimatum, they're not random headlines stacked next to each other. They are three expressions of the same strategic fact. This war is no longer about whether the United States can hit Iran and its aligned networks, because it can, and it's shown that it can over and over and over. No, I think that the war is now about whether the United States can impose enough control to stop the other side from turning every pressure point into a new crisis. Good news is right now the answer is not yet. And until that answer changes, every American tactical success is going to arrive wrapped in strategic exposure. A journalist disappears and Baghdad cannot close the case. A fighter plane goes down and rescue becomes a second battle. The Strait stays under pressure and the White House starts naming bridges and power plants. That is not random. That is the map. The United States can still reach into the teeth of the fight and bring its people home. And no one more than me is glad for that. Well, probably the pilots' families, but Iran and its aligned networks can still make sure the cost of doing so keeps rising. So no, this is not a clean American dominance story. And no, on the other side, it is not an Iranian victory story either. I think it's worse than both of those slogans. I think that this is now a war of leverage. It is a war of friction. It is a war where stronger power keeps winning moments and I'd say the weaker power keeps poisoning the space between them. That's the truth. That's the picture. And that's how it is. A couple of things to understand about all of the above is that while the analytical frame that I have presented is very strong, some of the tactical details that I have used to frame this opinion remains fluid, especially around the rescue package, because we don't know the exact mechanisms of the shoot down. Who brought it down? How was it brought down? There's also still unresolved command and control attribution in the Kittleson abduction. Public reporting in all of these stories is very fast moving, and it could sharpen or fracture in time. We will circle back to these next week's SITREP and follow up on them, because the story behind the rescue is fascinating. And I am sure that there is a Hollywood director who is already looking to make a made-for-TV movie about the recovery of those two air crew, those aviators in Iran. It's a good story, and it involved a lot of assets, but it doesn't take away from the fact that it kind of wasn't supposed to happen in the first place. I think that President Trump's tweet was probably timed after the recovery, because he would not have been able to make that statement had they dragged that weapons officer through the streets, dead or alive. All right. Let's see what else we have. Okay, let's do our once around the world. Let's talk a little bit about the U.S. combatant commands. No surprise, CENTCOM, absolutely the main effort, because the Iran war remains the dominant U.S. operational demand. Now in its fifth week, by the way, according to Reuters reporting. And that means CENTCOM is continuing to consume attention, strike capacity, air defense inventory, as well as senior decision bandwidth. Europe Command, well, they're holding a lot of deterrence. A lot of alliance politics are rotting around it. Trump is threatening to pull out of NATO again if they do not step up escort, deterrence, everything that is surrounding the Strait of Hormuz and all courses of action surrounding it. If NATO is not willing to comply, then Trump is threatening that the United States pulls out of NATO again. Is that going to happen? I strongly doubt it. But it's being bandied about, and that's a lot of the politics that are rotting around it. Now, the military architecture with Eurocom, it's still standing, but this friction over the Iran war, it's opened up a huge credibility problem inside of NATO. Reuters is reporting that Trump has told these allies that there is a deadline. I don't know what the deadline is. I can't find any public paraphrasing or verbatim reporting on the deadline. So until that's confirmed, I'm just going to assume that is, let me check my notes. I'm just going to assume that is hyperbole for the moment. So let's leave Eurocom for the moment and move over to Indo-PACOM. Still a pacing theater, but not getting full American focus. Taiwan, their defense ministry warned on April 2nd that budget delays could potentially disrupt procurement, maintenance, and training tied to a lot of the U.S. systems that we're selling them, in the middle of a broader concern that all of the United States' attention is being diluted by the Middle East. Hey, spoiler alert, it is. We're really focused on CENTCOM, Taiwan, and a lot of our other areas of responsibilities have been pushed way to the back burner, and that's just how it's going to be for a little while. All of our other commands that we've talked about, they're all carrying hidden weight. The Pentagon officially lists 11 combatant commands right now. The non-geographic, the secondary ones, which we've talked about, they're acting as shock absorbers for a lot of the strain that is imposed by CENTCOM, Eurocom, and Indo-PACOM. So what to watch over the next couple of weeks? Definitely CENTCOM duration. If this Iran war drags and it keeps draining the force, a short war is a shock. A longer war becomes a lot of structural strain. Reuters has been reporting the administration says it can, quote, see the finish line, but there's no still clean picture here. NATO cohesion, I would definitely look at that, because if if our alliance messaging keeps deteriorating, and I think it's going to, then Eurocom's deterrence value weakens along with it, even if its force remains intact. Political ambiguity like this invites testing. All you're asking for is one of our peer or near peer adversaries to test the resolve of NATO. Now is the time to do it if anyone was going to do it. Our attention is split in multiple theaters. Also, I would look at Taiwan's confidence and China's timing. The risk is not to Taiwan. It's not immediate abandonment. The risk is a perception that Washington is thin. Our concentration is thin enough to exploit. Taiwan's own readiness concerns are making that worse. If you followed, and I can't imagine why you would unless it was something that was of interest to you, but if you followed Taiwanese politics, there's a bit of infighting in their own government about how much money they should spend on defense, where that money should be going specifically once it is allocated for defense. Do they have confidence that the United States will be at their back? They're all good questions. I don't know what the end result is going to be, but it's definitely something that gives me concern because I don't want China taking over Taiwan. And if you are understanding the risks of that happening, you would say the same thing. You do not want Taiwan to be taken over by China either. The other thing that I'd like everybody to take a look at, or at least keep your eye on, is Transcom. That's the limit line. If our lift, our tanker support, and all of the sustainment that they do tightens while these three theaters remain active, then the United States simultaneously turns from strategy into, arithmetic. This is an inference, obviously, from a multi-theater load pattern. I'm not giving you a single source public declaration that any of the commands have said. I'm just making an inference here. I think the implications for the United States at this moment, best case, CENTCOM finishes fast with Iran, NATO turbulence is all contained, and Washington reconcentrates on Indo-PACOM. I don't think that's going to happen. I think most likely Iran is going to stay completely hot while keeping enough priorities in European and Indo-PACOM distorted enough to demand reassurances. Worst case, Iran goes way long. We have even louder NATO fracture, and a very opportunistic China or Russia probes U.S. focus and our alliance resolve. So, bookending this, I would say that the United States command system, it's still very functional, it's still very dangerous, and it's still very global, but it is operating with a lot less margin for error. And this is the part that a lot of people don't like to say, is that the machine is not breaking, it is compressing. Central Command is draining a lot of force, and European Command is testing a lot of cohesion. Indo-PACOM is testing focus. Everything else is just carrying recoil. All of this is based off of open source reporting, as always. These are command level assessments. None of this is a classified readiness picture. Some of the risks, I am making a judgment call. I am making a judgment call based off analytics drawn from multiple current sources rather than one single official metric. Okay. Let's talk briefly about support for the Iran war, at least here in the United States. I can't report, or actually I can, I'm choosing not to. I'm not going to talk about what the rest of the world's public support is for Iran because it's probably pretty low. And to be perfectly honest with you, it doesn't move the needle much for me. I pretty much focus on US unless there's something drawing my attention elsewhere. 2 polls have been recently done on Iran and the public support for the Iranian war. And frankly, the public mood, at least in the United States, is turning against a prolonged war. A lot of support exists for limited objectives like preventing an Iranian nuclear breakout, but there is no durable public mandate for an open-ended campaign. And the administration promised there wouldn't be. The electorate is signaling a familiar doctrine. Hit hard if you must, but get out fast. And the moment this war smells like Iraq Part 2, with the mission creep, ground troops, or, dead Americans, not to mention higher gas prices, which were already deep in the thick, a lot of the support for this campaign, it erodes, and it's eroding right now. Most Americans that are polled want the war wound down. They don't want it expanded. 2/3 currently want the U.S. to end involvement quickly, even if all objectives are not achieved. Ground force escalation is politically toxic. Most Americans believe ground troops are likely, but overwhelming majorities do not want that. The pain at the pump, the economic pain, it's driving a lot of opinion right now, more than battlefield logic. These fuel costs, these household financial strains, they are converting a lot of foreign policy into a domestic backlash, especially as we work up to the midterms. Right now, I think the administration is boxed in. It has to sell a mission nearly complete because the polling does not support a long war. It certainly doesn't support an occupation or any kind of in between, a broad escalation ladder. So looking at the numbers, the polling there's two polls that I have looked at. And both of them we'll talk specifically real quick, but these are the averages. 66% want a quick end to the U.S. involvement, even if we're not meeting all our goals. 27%, only 27, want to continue until all goals are met. 60% of those polled disapprove of military strikes on Iran. Now, that's based off of a Reuters Ipsos late March poll. 6 in 10. 6 people out of 10 polled say recent U.S. military action has gone too far. 26% say it has been about right. 65% think Trump will send ground troops. That's pretty high. I'm not amongst them. I don't think that we will. Only 7% of those support it. Same poll, Reuters, Ipsos found overall war approval is currently sitting at about 37%. So think about that for a minute. I don't know what your opinion on the conflict in Iran is. I am giving you facts. I do sprinkle my opinions in, and I'll give you my opinion now. I think that it's been a long time coming, and I definitely think that it's something that we needed to do. Now, I don't like the way it's being done. I certainly don't like the way that it's being handled on the diplomatic front, but I support it. As long as there's clear objectives and those objectives are obtainable, and once they are met, then that's it, regardless of, what the rest of it looks like. And stop fucking saying regime change. It's not going to happen, man. So let's just leave that off to the side. But that's my opinion. But I think it's interesting if only 37% of these polled found the overall war approval. Republicans remain more supportive than Democrats, shocker, and independents. But even within the GOP, there is a visible fracture over duration and escalation. Looking at the timeline of this real quick, we go back to March 19th. Reuters and the Ipsos reports that most Americans believe ground troops are coming. They strongly oppose it. March 25th, Associated Press NORC finds 6 in 10 say that a recent U.S. action against Iran has gone too far. Moving to March 31st, again, Reuters and the Ipsos and their tracking show 2/3 want a quick end to the war, even without full goal attainment. April 1st, Trump publicly shifts the messaging towards, quote, pretty quickly, and, quote, objectives nearly complete, which really reflects a lot of growing domestic pressure. All of this, if you look at it holistically, what does it imply? Well, it implies that the White House has very little political room for a long campaign, that air and maritime operations can be sold as finite, that a ground campaign cannot, unless triggered by a mass casualty shock. There's a lot of political implications here. Independents are really the fault line. This war, becomes more dangerous for the administration, the more it migrates from national security to inflation event. There's a lot of messaging implications. Stopping Iran's bomb remains much more defensible than reshape Iran, as I said, or regime transformation. Their words, public patience, all of this is tied to very narrow aims and not grand strategy. And I got to say, mine as well. I still think I'm in favor of what we're doing, but I really think there was a better way to do it from the beginning. There's a strategic implication here, and that is Tehran's best asymmetric play is not only military resistance, it's just to drag this out long enough to give pressure to shipping, oil shocks, God forbid, more U.S. casualties, and that deepens American domestic exhaustion. The polling says that this vulnerability that I'm sharing with you, it's completely real. The bottom line in all of this is that the American public, we are not in a rally around the flag posture. This is not 9/11. This is a very strong conditional tolerance posture, and that tolerance, it's thinning. Because this war does retain support, but as a limited punitive campaign. It is not going to continue to retain support as some long war of occupation or attrition or mission creep. That's the real constraint on the strategy for the United States right now. Not only what our military can do, but what can the electorate absorb? What will they continue to absorb? And to understand about these polls, and I'm always very hesitant to talk about polling numbers, but I did want to run through it briefly. Just remember that if you're a statistician or if you're somebody whose job is a pollster, then the words that you choose really matter. If you say approval of strikes, support for the war, and support for specific objectives, they're very different. And so the top lines vary by question design, the field date, when it was asked, how it was asked. Public opinion could also snap back very, very quickly after a major Iranian attack or any kind of visible battlefield success. So just, yeah, the polling numbers are strong, but you have to look at the questions that were asked. There's a whole host of metrics that go behind it. So take it with a grain of salt, but I mean, by all means, digest it because it's telling. It says that the U.S., the man on the street, America's main street, is not as pro-conflict in Iran as perhaps we thought, or perhaps we'd hoped for. Depends on how you're looking at it. Let's change completely away from Iran. We've been talking about them for quite a bit and for good reason, but I want to shift focus on my good friend, the PRC, People's Republic of China. It's going to still creep in to my news feeds, which means that I'm going to share a lot of it with you as we move into next year and my forecasted conflict between China and Taiwan. So China has been conducting a lot of seafloor mapping. They're using a very layered maritime system. Their Navy, their Coast Guard, some coercive law enforcement presence, maritime militia, really. And it's done very ambiguously. They're using a lot of dual use survey activity. It is designed to improve submarine and anti-submarine warfare options. There's been a lot of there's been a lot of recent patrols around Scarborough Shoal, say that 5 times fast, that Beijing is still synchronizing a lot of Navy, air, and Coast Guard pressure in all of these contested waters because China declares that all of those oceans are theirs. And it's not. A lot of that is either international waters or it's territory of nations that have either economic exclusion zones or their own territorial waters that encroach into it. So a lot of these are contested. And at the same time, I'm getting this from Reuters. They're reporting last week that Chinese research vessels and seabed sensors are surveying a lot of strategically relevant waters near Taiwan, Guam, the Malacca Strait, Indian Ocean, and the Arctic, really. All of these mapping efforts that China is currently doing appears very broad, very deliberate, and tied to future undersea operations instead of, civilian science. You don't have PLA naval vessels or Chinese Coast Guard vessels conducting surveys if it is for civilian science. I'm getting a lot of the reporting from Reuters, one of my go-tos. They have reported that there are dozens of Chinese research vessels gathering seabed and oceanographic data with a lot of military relevance, including bathymetry and the environmental variables that shape sonar performance, as well as submarine concealment. That kind of data that they're collecting is for a very specific thing. That data set is for improving route planning, sensor placement, target tracking, and battle space preparation. Interesting. So on the surface, China continues to normalize a lot of maritime presence. On March 29th, China conducted naval, air, and Coast Guard patrols all around the Scarborough Shoal. Reuters has reported similar South China Sea patrol activity in late January and early Feb. All of this reinforces a pattern of repeated and deliberately visible presence operations. CSIS AMTI has assessed in February that China's maritime militia averaged 241 vessels daily in 2025, and that's the highest level they have ever measured. A lot of this matters because this activity gives Beijing scalable pressure below the threshold of overt naval escalation. So why are they doing this mapping and why does it matter? Why do we care? Let them do all of the mapping they want, because this is why it's really easy to miss and misunderstand. Everything that's taking place at the surface is all for theater. They're testing the world's tolerance for what China is doing. And a lot of the times they win. There are freedom of navigation exercises that the United States and the United Kingdom conduct, but we're pretty much the only ones. So if China is allowed to encroach in some of these international waters and claim them as their territorial and no one contests it, it's like a squatter in your house. Sooner or later, the law says, well, it's actually theirs. So they are flooding the top of this area with surface ships while conducting underwater bathymetry, mapping, and a whole host of other things. All of this gives them a detailed knowledge of the seabed and the water column. Okay, that's the how, but doesn't explain the why, because that directly ties into submarine stealth and routing. It ties into anti-submarine warfare and submarine tracking. It allows them to place seabed sensors and a lot of unmanned systems. Gives them protection or targeting of undersea cables and infrastructure that runs through. And it gives them control of a lot of maritime choke points in a crisis or a conflict. That's why the locations that they're choosing near Taiwan and Guam and Malacca matter so much. These are not random science zones. These are all operational arteries. Reuters is reporting explicitly tying the survey data to likely submarine warfare utility. That is getting tied back to Pentagon's 2025 China report, which describes all of this in some broader integration with the Coast Guard, maritime, and militia coercive activities. This has strategic implications. It's wonky. I get it. But China is shaping the undersea battle space before any war starts. This is 100% pre-conflict preparation. You reduce uncertainty, you catalog and map the terrain, and then you build options. And this does not prove an imminent war, but it does show that China is conducting a very methodical contingency plan. This maritime campaign is now full spectrum. I mean, Beijing is no longer just contesting reefs and shoals with hulls and water cannons. They're combining surface pressure, a lot of gray zone ambiguity, say it with me, and subsea intelligence collection, all into a huge maritime strategy. The U.S. and their allied forces undersea advantages, we are the direct target here, because if China can better understand all of the acoustic conditions, the seabed geometry near these key transit routes. It's narrowing one of the traditional U.S. advantages, which is undersea maneuver and detection. We're very good at it. That's the real competitive logic that China is using behind this mapping. This is inference grounded in military utility of the survey data. This is not a official Chinese admission, by the way. I think this is going to continue while preparations deepen. I think that this pattern, this visible patrols, it keeps a lot of rivals politically off balance while all of their sensing and mapping are taking place. China does not have to choose between coercion and preparation. It's doing both. So they're not just building a bigger fleet, it's building a smarter maritime warfighting system. A lot of these ships will intimidate in public, but the mapping prepares them in silence. I think this is important. This is laying the foundation for everything that moves forward. Not this one act, but acts like this, and there's been a lot. Just to understand a couple of things, this mapping campaign and its dual use military value, they're very well supported. But the exact intended wartime use of each of these individual survey missions, it's inferred in many ways because China just doesn't admit what they're doing. They label a lot of this as scientific or civilian. They basically lie. Yeah, there's more. China just had the world's fastest wind tunnel come online. Ridiculous. Mach 30, able to test hypersonic wind conditions. And they didn't use a traditional method. They're using explosions and the force of the explosion to generate the air volume that reaches Mach 30. The best that the United States has is a Mach 7 wind tunnel. Again, you may be asking, like, why do I care about this stuff? Well, the space shuttle hits about Mach 25 when it enters the atmosphere, and we did a lot of computer modeling to simulate the effects, but we had no wind tunnel to test it. So you look at the space race and what's coming next, and I've told you before that space is, wait for it, the final frontier. That's right. Things like this wind tunnel that can test hypersonic at 30 Mach is directly designed for testing space-based for the most part. I mean, yeah, you can test some terrestrial hypersonic missiles, things like that, but its real niche is reentry vehicles on things like the space shuttle or space-based planes. So we're behind, and we are getting behind, and we are falling behind more and more every year against China. So it's not something I'm happy to admit. It's not something I'm proud of. But I will tell you what I'm extraordinarily proud of, and that is the Artemis II launch. If you missed it, shame on you, because that was history. I grew up watching the space shuttle. I was watching it when it blew up. It was absolutely devastating. I have been a fan of space and everything space related since I was a boy. And the launch of the Artemis II, taking four astronauts on NASA's first crewed lunar mission in 50 years. I'm not afraid to say it. I was crying. I have some folks that know some folks that work in NASA, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room from what I was told. That, some 300 people were watching that inside of launch control, flight control, and they were ecstatic. We have been promising to return to the moon since the Apollo program stopped, and we finally did it. And this is huge for the United States, but beyond, hegemony, beyond politics, it's just for the human race. I mean, this is incredible. The 4-person crew, they're currently on a 10-day lunar flyby to validate Orion, SLS, crew operations, life support, a lot of deep space mission execution. So early mission milestones, including solar array deployment, all successful. I watched the launch. It was really amazing. And finally, this is a real mission. This is not a concept demo. NASA, welcome back. You've now proven it can launch humans back into cislunar space. And that restores viable U.S. credibility in human deep space flight. But the launch only validates the front end of this whole campaign. It does not prove the full lunar architecture is mature, stable, or on a clean path to sustained operations. So I'm going to say this word a couple of times, and it is not a verb identification word, cislunar. It does not mean that it's a straight moon. It refers to the space region between the Earth and the moon, or within the moon's orbit, including the lunar surface. It's derived from the Latin meaning on this side of the moon. This area that I am referring to when I say cislunar, it represents a critical growing frontier for military, commercial, and scientific operations, all particularly within the Earth-Moon gravitational sphere. So I'm going to say it a lot. Add it to your bingo card. NASA has already restructured Artemis because the original sequence that it spoke of outran hardware maturity. In February of 2026, NASA added a new mission in 2027. It shifted Artemis II into a low Earth orbit systems test. It moved the first lunar landing to Artemis IV. That's going to take place in 2028. Now, still fantastic, but it is an institutional admission that the downstream stack, the landers, the docking suits, integration, and the cadence, it just wasn't ready for the old timeline. So what drove the rework? Well, NASA's Office of Inspector General said that the scheduled changes were tied to technical challenges, including investigation of Orion's Artemis I heat shield performance, a lot of work on Orion environmental control and life support systems circuitry. This took place before Artemis II. The same reporting is saying that the human landing system effort had already slipped with a continued risk to the overall broader campaign. So we kind of translate this. NASA didn't slow down by choice. It kind of slowed down because physics and systems integration just refused to obey politics. Now, there is a geopolitical fit. There's a reason why I'm talking about this story. I love space. I love talking about space. I'm going to continue to, and I think there's a dovetail into the broader strategic framework. And in this instance, there is. Artemis II sits inside of a larger U.S. and China contest over who shapes the operating environment of cislunar space. Reuters is noting that NASA's lunar push is explicitly framed against China's plan for a crewed lunar landing by 2030. This is not just about planting flags, ladies and gentlemen. It is about who establishes presence, logistics, norms, partner dependence, and frankly, long-term access around the moon itself. If you ever watched a little show on Apple Plus about the United States, it's a fictional history. The United States loses the space race to the Russians. Russians are the first one to put somebody on the moon. And then it takes place over decades and decades and decades. The show is called For All Mankind. It's fantastic. And in it, the PRC is, up there as well. And it's fictionalized, and it takes place in a obviously a fictionalized history and a fictionalized future, but there are real world implications here if the United States, or at least a Western power, and really we're the only ones that are putting people up into space right now, fall behind in the space race. It is not the United States versus the Soviet Union anymore. That's over. It is now the United States and PRC. Our goals do not align with theirs. Across the board. Ideologically, financially, you name it, in almost every category. So this is important that we get this right. It speaks to a lot of alliance dimensions. The United States, we're not competing alone. Artemis is a coalition program. We have Canada. They have a crew member on the Artemis II. Europe powers Orion through the European Service Module. The Artemis Accords has 61 signatories as of January 26th of this year. And that matters because the real race, as I said, it's not merely technological. This is institutional. Whichever side builds the largest, more interoperable bloc gains legitimacy, gains inertia. China and Russia, they are continuing to advance the International Lunar Research Station concept. That is their counterweight to what we're doing with Artemis. While U.S. defense reporting is high. Sorry, boy, that beer went down the wrong pipe. Hold on. Okay, I'm better. Where was I? Oh, right. U.S. defense reporting is highlighting China's continued push in cislunar and a lot of the deep space activities. That strategic meaning, it's very, very simple. We have two competing lunar ecosystems taking shape. One is U.S.-led and alliance-based. The other is centered on Chinese and Russian alignment, with room for states that do not want to operate inside the Artemis rule set. All of this implies that Artemis II, it's very strategic. Our launch sends a strategic signal flare, not final proof of dominance, but it does show the United States can still execute a very credible crewed cislunar mission. Is that like 5 or 7 times that I've said cislunar? I'm just going to keep saying it. I just like the way it rolls off the tongue. It helps Washington hold a lot of narrative control, and it reassures a lot of our allies that have helped participate in getting Artemis off the ground. It also demonstrates that the United States coalition that we have remains very relevant operationally, but the mission also exposes some truth. This contest has moved beyond prestige into infrastructure, cadence, affordability, and a lot of rule setting. If the United States cannot sustain this tempo and mature the landing architecture, then symbolic wins are going to decay pretty fast. The geopolitical space race is starting to look less like Apollo and more like maritime competition. The winner will not be the side that visits the moon once. The winner will be the side whose systems others must plug into for transport, standards, communications, safety, and access. Artemis II is keeping the United States in the lead conversation, but it does not end the race. So the bottom line here is Artemis II is a major U.S. success. Strategically, buys credibility, not closure. Geopolitically, it's part of a much broader contest over who writes the rules and builds the coalition architecture for the moon and cislunar space. The implication here is if Artemis II ends cleanly, then NASA gains, well, they gain a lot. Political oxygen, a lot of alliance leverage. If post-flight analysis or a lot of the downstream delays that have happened continue to deepen, then China, they don't need a big dramatic upset. It only needs to keep building what they're doing, building a rival system that other states find reliable, useful, and cheaper to join. I don't think that's going to happen because we have some pretty major players in our corner. United Launch Alliance, SpaceX, and NASA. So we have private and public. But they're building some pretty big stuff on the other side of the ocean, and they are absolutely going to launch by 2030. They do not have, I got to be careful how I phrase this because I don't have sightings to back it up. In my opinion, they do not have the same safety constraints and testing procedures that NASA and US-based private companies have. In my opinion, they are much more likely to cut corners to get to where they need to be by 2030, especially if it means beating the United States. So they don't need a dramatic upset. They only need to keep building this system. That's it. A couple of caveats I want you to be aware of. Remember, Artemis II, it's still on an active mission as of today. They've sent back some great pictures. If you haven't seen it, first time that they have shown that human eyes have looked on the backside of the moon at some of these craters, the largest among them. So final judgment is going to really depend heavily on a lot of translunar operations, reentry, and recovery. I think the broader strategic picture also depends tremendously on whether NASA's revised 2027, 2028 architecture holds or slips again. I want to see Artemis 4 go back to the moon so that all of you, we faked the moon landing crowds can shut the fuck up. There's a flag up there. It was planted. It was not in a Hollywood studio. And I cannot wait for fresh eyes to revisit the lunar surface to prove that we did put people on the moon. What's interesting is that we put people on the moon at a level of technology that we could, the parallel between where the United States was technologically when we put people on the moon is very similar to us today and Mars. Does that make sense? We could put people on the moon based off 1969 technology. We can put people on Mars today based off 2026. So it's that same kind of paradigm. Very exciting. I am very interested and passionate about seeing Artemis come home, about seeing a lot of these photographs as they fly over to the backside of the moon, gather a lot of the information that they need, a lot of the tests that they need to make this whole thing work. I think it's fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to it. So that is our SITREP for the week. I hope everyone's Easter, as I said in the beginning, was wonderful. I know that everyone enjoyed the time off. If I'm not mistaken, most of us have spring break next week, so enjoy that as well. And for myself, I will be, what am I going to do? I don't think I'm taking any time off. If I do, I'll tell you all about it. But as of right now, there's just too much to do and too much to keep an eye on. So until next time, this is Brad Colbert, the Iceman, reminding all of you to stay frosty.
Improvise, adapt, and overcome.